Talk to me about like infusing those playful moments in everyday life and habits with kids.
Yeah, and I mean that's my overall goal is help parents be able to do that and just kind of use those little moments every single day and really just connect and play with our kids. I am such a fan of just being out in nature. And so we like to go to the creeks nearby and play in the water and play in the dirt. My kids can get as dirty as they want. We keep extra clothes in the car because we never know when we're gonna run into like a creek to play in or some mud puddles to jump in.
Shraysi, stop it! No! Sit down!
Yeah, I mean, that is such a huge thing that I see. I have, parents and teachers coming to me saying, this kid cannot do XYZ. And the first thing I ask them is, what have you tried? How have you tried to teach them?
You talk a lot about, in your work, you talk a lot about purposeful and mindful play.
Yeah, and I think that's where being mindful of what we're providing them to do comes in because, if I give my kid a list of ingredients and tell them to mix them all together, like they're not going to know what to do. And so
Jess, thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited to talk to you on Kidsy Connects. For all our viewers watching, Jess is a pediatric occupational therapist who is also the founder and creator of Mindful Play OT. She specializes in providing children with purposeful play, sensory-rich experiences, as well as helping kids hit various developmental milestones along the way. Jess, we have so much to get into because I am fascinated by the work that you do, especially as it relates to playing. Can you perhaps just start off in demystifying what exactly does a pediatric occupational therapist do?
Yeah, so occupational therapists in general, we work with people of all ages. So obviously, I work with kids, whether they have some kind of developmental delay or some kind of impairment, regardless of what that is. And so we're working with them to do the activities that they need and want to do by building their skills, adapting the environment, adapting the tasks so that they can participate in their activities and be more independent.
When I was actually doing my research on you, I came across a post that you posted on Instagram about blowing bubbles while pooping, and I was laughing out loud. I thought it was hilarious. And then also surprised and not surprised to see that that one post got 10 million views, which to me is wild that something as so ordinary as pooping can really resonate with so many parents as being this thing that you're just helping your child do. Talk to me about like infusing those playful moments in everyday life and habits with kids.
Yeah, and I mean that's my overall goal is help parents be able to do that and just kind of use those little moments every single day and really just connect and play with our kids. And a lot of times it's those really teeny tiny skills that I share that people are like, "Oh wow, that's like such a great idea, something I use and something that works." And I think that using play because that's our kids' language. That's how they learn, that's how they interact with people. So using play every day to connect with them and learn those skills, I think is really important. And just finding little moments to sneak that into their everyday routine.
You talk a lot about, in your work, you talk a lot about purposeful and mindful play. How is that different to just regular play? Like, how do I know when I'm playing with my child, I'm actually doing something that's really helpful and nurturing their development versus just being pure goofy and silly, which I think sometimes a lot of parents do.
Yeah, and I mean, the goofy and the silly is also helpful because that's helping you build your connection with your child and giving them a safe space. Because if they don't feel safe in that relationship, that's going to be more harm for their development. And so the idea with mindful play is just kind of being more mindful about what we're providing for our kids and what we're doing for them. And it's not necessarily not letting them engage in open play and just letting them go and be, because that is also incredibly important. Kids tend to gravitate towards those things that are going to build their skills anyway. But I like to encourage parents to just be a little bit more mindful. Like, what are those skills that your child is working on, or what are they struggling with? And how can we add little things in to help them build those skills a little bit more?
Can you give our audience some examples? Because I'm sure they would love perhaps like 2 or 3 things that they can start incorporating with their little kids. Let's take toddlers as a great example. So, what is something that we can do with our toddlers on a daily basis that is actually the purposeful, mindful play that you're talking about?
Yeah, so if we think about fine motor skills and where a toddler's developing, so they're not writing yet, we're not going to be worrying about letters, but we are going to be wanting to provide them with opportunities to scribble and to color and just kind of giving them those tools and the time and the experience to do those things. Another one that I like to talk about is scissor skills with toddlers because I get a lot of parents who are afraid to give their toddler scissors. And I like to use safety scissors, little plastic scissors that are only going to cut paper. But we have kids who come into kindergarten and don't really know how to cut because they haven't been given opportunity to practice that skill. And so if we're giving kids the opportunity to practice younger and just kind of letting them explore and learn how those things work, they're going to be able to go to preschool and kindergarten and maybe be a little bit more confident in that skill versus a child who hasn't been given that exposure or that ability to practice.
I was smiling when you talked about the scissors because I'm in that camp. Like I was very fearful about giving them scissors or a knife, even though they were showing so much interest in like, mommy, I want to cook with you. I have 2 little girls who are both toddlers and they're always wanting to be in the kitchen or do a little bit more advanced arts and crafts. So, what about involving your child in the kitchen? Because I'm sure a lot of parents go through what I'm going through, which is your kid wants to chop, your kid wants to mix, your kid wants to cook. So how can we maybe navigate the kitchen with our adventurous, thrill-seeking toddlers?
Yeah, I actually share about that a lot too. There's a set of safety knives that I love to use with my kids. They're plastic and they're like serrated, but they actually work really well. And so my kids, like I'll give them a job while we're cooking. And so that might be cutting cucumbers or I'll have like peppers cut and they'll be in charge of chopping them. And I give them those safety scissors or safety knife and just kind of giving them that confidence to use things in a safe way. And involving them in the kitchen when we're cooking is just, I mean, that's one of the best things you can do for your kids while they're young. And I know that sometimes it's really overwhelming and it's like you just want to get dinner ready, you just want to move on and it's after school where everything's back to back and we're so rushed, but taking that time to slow down and involve them and teach them what goes into making a meal and what goes into cleaning up the meal. My kids love like wiping the counters and cleaning the dish. My daughter, she just turned 4, she loves doing the dishes. So I let her do them. Like that's fun for her and it's a great skill for her to be learning. And there's so many things that go into cooking, like measuring and pouring and just those bilateral coordination skills, like you said, with cutting, that are just so beneficial for kids to learn in that real life activity. And also they're connecting with you while they're doing it. And that's just so valuable.
I love that you shared that because I do notice a sense of pride in my 4-year-old girl. And I also see a lot of clean, happy, empty plates when it's a meal that they've been involved in preparing. And it doesn't matter how many vegetables I throw in there, she'll actually eat it because she was involved in making it. So that pride and that confidence you're talking about really stands out to me. I do also want to talk about what about times where you can see they're clearly getting really frustrated in this new skill or this new task, and it could maybe be on the verge of a complete tantrum or meltdown, or it's gone in that direction. Do you have any useful tips for parents to navigate those quote unquote terrible twos, terrible threes? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where being mindful of what we're providing them to do comes in because, if I give my kid a list of ingredients and tell them to mix them all together, like they're not going to know what to do. And so we have to just kind of be mindful of how much assistance we're giving. And there's a thing called scaffolding where we want to provide enough support that they can complete the activity, but not too much support that we're taking away from what they're able to do and what they can do independently. So it's just kind of finding that balance of like how much support you can give them. And when things get hard, just kind of, I mean, these are things that we can do all day long, is showing them what we do when things get hard and how we deal with things that get hard. And that as they watch us do that and they learn from us, we can kind of encourage them to do the same and give them those reminders. And I also like to, like with my kids, we kind of have like the coping skills that I know that they like, and we practice them and we go over them during times where they're calm. And so when we are in those moments where they're starting to get frustrated, we can I can prompt them to use those coping, or we can take a little break and if it's hugs that they need or whatever coping skills that normally work for them, just kind of stepping away for a few minutes, using those skills, and then we can talk about it and kind of process through it and problem solve. Like, okay, well, it wasn't working for you to do it this way, but what are some other things that we can try so that we can complete whatever goal it is that we were working on?
Okay, I have so many questions, but the two that immediately stand out to me is why are you discussing coping skills with your kids in these really calm moments when it's not related to the event that's happening? And then can you share with us, because I'm sure people would want to know, well, what's the expert doing? What's the pediatrician doing? So share with us, like, what are some of the coping skills that you've employed that have really worked for you and your kids?
Yeah, so it's going to be different for every kid. My two kids are extremely different in the coping skills that they like. And the reason that we practice that when we're calm is because when they're in that frustrated moment, their brain is offline. They're in fight or flight. They can't logically think through, like, okay, you're trying to teach me a coping skill, but I can't even, I'm so upset at this point that I can't learn that skill right now. And so that's why we go over those skills when we're calm. And sometimes the way that I do that is I'll just kind of say like, hey, sometimes when I'm frustrated, I like to take some deep breaths. Let's practice some deep breaths and do those together. And so some of the things that my kids like to do, my 4-year-old, she likes to do I posted about this one time too, the where you hold up your fingers and they blow them out like candles. And so she'll ask for finger candles and hold up my fingers and she'll take a deep breath. And I've taught her throughout the way too, like breathe in through your nose and then a long breath out of your mouth. And sometimes like it turns playful, which is also something that's going to help them bring them back down from that too. So like she'll get silly with it and she'll give like a really hard breath and I'll like pop the candle down and then I'll pick it back up and I'll say, oh, that breath was too hard. The fire lit up again. And so she'll kind of move through that. And by the end of it, we're just kind of playing and it's fun and we're calm. And the important thing after that too is to go back and talk about the difficult moment and just kind of talk about what we could have done differently or problem solve through that moment.
I love that you incorporated such a creative, unique, playful technique in a moment of like high stress and high anxiety. Because you're right, that is so much so their language and the way that they communicate. So I think that's such an incredibly useful tip. I want to move on and talk about childhood development and milestone. I think I've noticed especially there's this pressure there's pressure on parents to do all sorts of things when they become a mom or dad, but there's a lot of pressure around the child hitting all of their developmental milestones on time. And then there's the stigma around like, well, your child is late or your child is delayed. I mean, is there such thing as a delayed or late child, or is it just everybody's just hitting their stride in their own time?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there definitely is such a big stigma around it. And I think there's a lot of comparison game there too, where, if we think about toddlers who are learning to walk, you have a friend whose toddler is walking at 10 months and your child's 14 months old and they're not walking yet. And so there's that comparison game too of like, oh no, like what am I doing wrong that my child's not walking yet? And I think that's really harmful to the way that we think about those milestones. So I'd like to encourage parents to think about those milestones more as like a guide and just information about where your child is versus they need to be doing this thing by this certain age. And the other thing to think about it with the milestones is they're building upon each other. So, if we're maybe a little bit late on crawling or rolling over, we can't be expected to just automatically pick up the next thing. Like they're building upon each other. So every kid is just kind of developing at their own pace. And I think it's really important to just take that information and know that, okay, some kids are doing this at this age. Where is my kid at and how can I support them in what they're doing? So again, we're not looking at a toddler and thinking like, how am I going to get my toddler to get dressed when they're only 1 year old. But we have to kind of take a step back and look at where they're at now and how we can support them. So we're not going to be looking at putting pants and a shirt on right away. Let's focus maybe on let's put socks on and take our socks off and just kind of breaking those things down and learning that it's just information for us. It just helps to guide us a little bit versus like this is the rule book of where our kids need to be.
One of the things that you briefly touched upon earlier, which I want to talk about, is you mentioned that it's really hard for a child to do a skill or to have a skill that they haven't really been exposed to. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is such a huge thing that I see. I have, parents and teachers coming to me and saying, this kid cannot do XYZ. And the first thing I ask them is, what have you tried? How have you tried to teach them? And a lot of times they just don't necessarily think about that because I think we're also so often told that like kids just develop, they're just going to develop these skills. But when those skills are a little bit more involved, like we have to be teaching them. And so, some kids are going to learn pretty quickly. They're going to be able to observe it and then just go do it. And some kids need very repeated practice with that skill to be able to learn it. So it really does come down to exposure and the proper environment to do those skills. Like if we think about babies who are like, if you've heard of container syndrome, so the babies who are put in containers all the time and not given an opportunity to lay on the floor and explore their environment, they're probably going to take longer to roll over and crawl and maybe even walk because they're not given as much opportunity to build those motor skills.
That's fascinating. What are some of the skills that are the most common that you see where parents are like, "Oh, my kid's not doing this. My kid's not doing this." Like, do you see a pattern, or could it just be anything and everything?
It depends on the age. For obviously for the toddler age, walking is the big one. And I always like to focus on crawling too because, the CDC took away crawling as a milestone, but it is so important. It's an extremely important milestone. And so we get a lot of that with the toddler age, the crawling and the walking and being afraid that they're delayed in that. We get a lot of speech things, which obviously I'm not a speech therapist, but those things do come up. And I work a lot more with like the preschool age and kindergarten age. And so I get a lot of like holding a pencil and writing their letters, writing their name. I get a lot of parents of preschoolers who are in that 3-year-old range that say like, my kid's not writing their name yet. Like what am I doing wrong? And it's 3 is still really young to be writing their name. So again, I think it's those unrealistic expectations and maybe those just like I knew a 3-year-old who wrote their name and why can't my 3-year-old write their name?
What is a really useful tip or trick that parents can utilize in their day to day as they're teaching their child those fine motor skills around like pencil control or holding a crayon or even writing?
Yeah, again, just that exposure and showing them how to do it. And thinking about like we're not just building that skill by giving them the crayons and giving them the pencil, but doing other fine motor activities like stringing beads is a really good one because you're working on that pincer graph. And even things like food play where we're giving them little Cheerios and little pieces of food where they're working on picking them up with that pincer grasp and those fingers. And just kind of again providing those opportunities to explore their environment out there and interacting with it.
You mentioned food play, and immediately my mind went to that being such a sensory experience because you often see these like Pinterest perfect moments of parents or people talking about, well, here's a sensory bin you can create, and here's this sensory game you can play. What is it about the sensory experience that is so important for a child?
Yeah, so sensory, we kids use their senses to learn. That's how they learn about the world and they learn how to interact with the world. And I'm glad you mentioned like sensory bins and things like that because, well, those things are fun and they're great. And I do sensory bins. I love sensory bins, but at the same time, it's just another material to interact with. And when kids are interacting with the world, just being outside and seeing things in nature, like they're using their senses to learn about how the world works. And, given those opportunities to use their body to interact with the environment and learn about body awareness, emotional regulation, and it's just kind of the sensory is the foundation of how they learn everything and develop their skills.
What are some of your favorite sensory rich play moments or play experiences that you think every parent should be 100% giving their child? Like maybe your top 3 favorite sensory moments.
I am such a fan of just being out in nature. And so we like to go to the creeks nearby and play in the water and play in the dirt. My kids can get as dirty as they want. We keep extra clothes in the car because we never know when we're gonna run into like a creek to play in or some mud puddles to jump in. And I think that interacting with nature is one of those big things and just letting them explore and kind of it I know that it's hard to step back and like, if you're not wearing the right clothes or they don't have an extra set of clothes and they're playing in the creek and it's like, don't get too wet or don't fall in.
Mm.
But if they do, then what does it matter, right? Like, okay, so they have to sit in the car wet on the drive home, and then when they get home, they can change. So I think sometimes we just kind of have to step back and let them explore the environment in the way that they want to explore it. Another one that we like, again, interacting with nature, like we have a mud kitchen, and that is probably our favorite thing. My kids are out in the mud kitchen every day, just making whatever it is they make out there. And so we absolutely love the mud kitchen. I think that is such a great sensory experience for them. But then I also like I do love to set up sensory play that's just like shaving cream or playing with some kind of sensory material. Like we do a lot of bins with like dried noodles and beans and even the wet stuff like chia seed slime and things like that. Like we also love exploring those different textures.
Is it as simple as just dumping everything into a bin and just giving it to them for them to just touch and smell and maybe even put in their mouth? Because, everything that they hold has to go in the mouth eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to provide certain tools, and sometimes I do like themes. So if it's like rainbow rice, we might have like some of our rainbow books out, and I might get some like colored bowls so that they can sort things, and tools that encourage them to scoop and to pour and things like that. But sometimes I do think that it's important to just then let them do what they want to do. Like I find, especially with my 4-year-old, sometimes I can give her a sensory bin and let her kind of decide what do I want in this sensory bin, and she'll go explore. Like she'll go get the most random thing. Like she has a box of disposable gloves, and like she'll grab that for everything. So if I give her a bin, she's probably going to go grab those gloves and either fill them or just do something with them. So I think giving them that open opportunity is also beneficial, but also sometimes it's a balance. Sometimes providing the tools for them to.
I want to talk about pooping. And the reason I want to talk about it is because it's such a big milestone in a child's life and in a parent's life as well, when they're starting to get to the point where they are either really curious about the potty or they're ready to go do it themselves and they start to mimic you, like by flushing or grabbing the toilet paper. And I feel like it's a topic that just does not get discussed enough, yet it is so important. And every parent's navigating this blindly. How do you navigate pooping with a child, especially
Yeah.
when they're starting to show signs that like, hey, I might be ready to go do this myself?
I think that pooping causes so much stress for parents because there are so many things that can get in the way of a child being able to do it successfully. And so there's so many components that go into it, from what we feed our kids and how hydrated they are to what position they're sitting in, and do they have a calm environment when they're trying to poop? And have they already been pee trained and they're struggling to get poop out? Are they constipated? There's so many factors that go into it. And a lot of times I get questions about kids like holding their poop or just not wanting to sit on the toilet. Like parents will say that their kids are pee trained and they've been trained for a while, but they want a diaper to poop. And so there's just so many things, so many struggles that can come up with pooping. But I kind of like to approach it, first and foremost, just kind of setting the environment for them. And that first starts with making sure that they have the proper positioning to get their poop out. And so I just posted about this the other day on how I make sure that my kids have the proper positioning. And whether that's like if you have a toddler toilet that sits on the floor, they're probably going to be in a good position where their knees are above their hips and almost squatting down. But then we get into using the big toilet, and I like to use those ladder seats that sit over the toilet where they can climb up. And a lot of times when kids are first learning how to poop, their knees, the footrest isn't going to be high enough. And so I just posted the other day about how I would modify that and just put like a little box on it and make sure that those knees get above the hips and just make sure that they have proper positioning. And then on top of that, I like to have like potty training baskets in the bathroom where there's maybe a little book to read, some fidgets to play with while they're sitting on the toilet. And again, that comes back to my post about blowing the bubbles and making sure that they are able to relax and take those deep breaths so that they can relax the pelvic floor. so that it comes out a lot easier.
I love those tips. I am a big fan of the latter. I didn't think about the box, but you're right. Like in the early days, their feet they do dangle a little bit. I do a game where I sometimes get my daughter to count, and I tell her to count I'm Indian, so we speak Hindi at home, and so I have her count in Hindi, and she's learning Spanish at her her pre-kindy school, and so she'll count in Spanish, and by the time she gets to the English counting 1 to 10, it's the job's done.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of like having a basket because adults need that too. We also sometimes have magazines or we bring our phone into the bathroom. And so is it more to help them relax or to maybe distract them from focusing too hard on the actual event? Is that what it's for?
Yeah, I think mostly to relax, and sometimes I'll even for kids who are really struggling, sometimes I'll recommend like turning the lights down low, bringing in like one of those projector lights that put stars around the room, and just getting them into that relaxed state. Because if they're stressed out, they're probably like clenching and holding it in essentially. And so relaxing that environment is probably the first step in being able to do that.
One more question on pooping, and then we can move away from this, which is the wiping and the cleaning up part. And what I find so interesting is that so many schools, even by the time your child is 3 or 4, actually do require the child to be fully potty trained, which partly confuses me because I look at how teeny tiny their arms are sometimes. And I do know that, sometimes they are given assistance or help through teachers and caretakers. But do you have any useful tips that you can teach or that you've done successfully that help your child just get a little better at wiping themselves afterwards?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like you said, when they're going into preschool, usually they have to be potty trained. But the milestone for being able to wipe, like we see, it's 5 to 7 years old. And again, it's one of those teaching moments. So, have you tried to teach your 5-year-old how to wipe, or have you just been wiping for them the whole time? And most kids don't poop at school, but sometimes it does happen, and a lot of times they don't know how to wipe properly. And it's funny you mentioned the size of the arms because I know, like, I remember something being viral for a while where when the baby puts their arms over their head, their arms like barely reach the top of their head. And then there's like a toddler and they have a little bit more space. And as we go, the proportions of our body parts are so different. And so that's why, like 3 and 4 years old, it's really hard for them to wipe because they can't reach. There's so much that goes into that wiping motion and being able to just reach back there. And so what I like to do first to see if they can even reach is I actually have a post on this too where I'll put little stickers down the middle of the butt, or even just as they're sitting on a chair, I'll put stickers on the chair and see if they can reach behind and grab those stickers and pull them. I know that there's like videos floating around about how there's like 2 balloons put together, and I think they put peanut butter on it and like stick it behind the kids' chairs in like a preschool class or something. And then all the kids practice wiping those balloons, and things like that. Just practicing reaching those hands behind, even putting like a plastic bottle or even a bowl behind, and taking toys and reaching behind and putting them back there, and just getting that movement is just the first step. Because if they can't reach back there and do that movement, then they're not going to be able to wipe. And then we kind of come into just knowing how to wipe things in general. So just practice wiping the table, practice wiping things off of the toys so that they can learn how to like get it all scooped off of there so that there's nothing left, and teaching them how to kind of check the toilet paper. And if there's still anything on it, then that's not good enough. We have to do another one. I've even seen mirrors that go on the back of the toilet so that the kids can see a little bit better and see if there's anything left. And again, that's just one of those processes that is so complex. Like, we don't really think about that. Like, we've all just kind of learned to wipe as we did. But when we're teaching our own kids, it's kind of like, wait, there's so many steps to this. How do we break it down, and how do we actually teach this?
I love all those suggestions that you just gave about all of those different games that you could play to help them wipe. I'm definitely going to be incorporating a lot of those because I'm in that phase right now. And I mean, like, sort of my quick hack for it has just been giving my daughter flushable wipes. I even pack one in her bag to take to school because sometimes I think the dry toilet paper just doesn't do a good enough job. But to your point, she holds it and waits until she gets home, until she feels she can really release and it's a safe space to go. It's fascinating that so many kids do that. Jess, what is one thing that parents, as they're navigating toddlerhood and preschool, if there's one thing you'd like them to take away from this episode, what would be that one thing be? And I know we uncovered so much, and I love that you really gave such useful, tangible advice that people can just go ahead and start implementing in their day to day. What's like the one important message you want every mom and dad to take away from today?
I think probably the most important thing that I like to empower parents to do is kind of focus more on their connection with their child. So we don't need all the fancy toys and the fancy sensory bins and all those experiences. We don't need to have all the money to go to all the nice places and go to Disney and all these things. What kids need most is that connection with their adult and just having somebody to learn from and having somebody to kind of model for them and be that safe space for them every day and that connection. I think that's the most important thing.
For parents who would love to find you, reach out to you, follow you, write to you, what are all the places in which they can start following you?
Yeah, the biggest place is Instagram. That's kind of where I share all those tips and little tricks and where you can find all of my resources. And that's mindfulplay.ot. So that's the main place that you can find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure to talk to you and unpack, I think, what was not only really fun, but also really eye-opening and insightful strategies. I think what I loved most about our conversation was how everything you shared is so doable in our day-to-day lives. Like, you don't need to go and drop, hundreds or thousands of dollars in order to make these things happen at home.
Yeah, and that's my whole goal is just to kind of simplify child development, help us support our kids in the easiest way that we can.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, Jess.
Thank you.